By 1918, 4 years of war had left Germany completely weakened and exhausted. Millions of German soldiers had been killed or seriously wounded on various fronts of the war. Continuous fighting had caused Germany to suffer severe shortages of soldiers and resources. A severe shortage of food, fuel, and essential goods had emerged throughout the country. Because of the naval blockade, supplies from foreign countries had almost completely stopped. Germany's economy was gradually collapsing, and industrial production was continuously declining. Production had begun to stop in many factories because of shortages of raw materials. Long lines for food had begun to appear in cities and villages. Millions of families were struggling with difficult conditions such as hunger, poverty, and disease. Cases of malnutrition and disease among children and the elderly had begun to rise rapidly. The war had completely disrupted the lives of ordinary people. Every family had become a victim of the tragedy of war in one way or another. The news of soldiers' deaths was continuously breaking people's morale. The public's trust in the government and the military had gradually begun to decline. People had begun to feel that this war could no longer be won. An atmosphere of despair, fear, and dissatisfaction had begun to spread across the country. Many people had begun demanding an immediate end to the war. Germany, which had once challenged all of Europe, was now struggling to save itself. The power of the great German Empire was growing weaker day by day. By 1918, Germany had reached the very brink of defeat. Britain, France, and their allies had begun to put immense pressure on Germany from every direction. The Allied powers had established control over the seas and imposed a blockade on Germany. Because of this blockade, Germany began to experience severe shortages of food and essential goods. Millions of civilians were unable to obtain adequate food and medicines. The German army was also facing shortages of ammunition and other essential resources. German soldiers were being continuously forced to retreat on several fronts. The Allied powers' new military strategies were becoming a major challenge for Germany. America's entry into the war provided the Allied powers with new energy and resources. The Allied armies were steadily growing stronger in both numbers and resources. On the other hand, Germany's military capability was weakening day by day. Recruiting new soldiers was becoming increasingly difficult for Germany. Shortages of weapons, fuel, and food had lowered the morale of the German army. The war was being felt not only on the borders but also within Germany's cities. With each passing day, the hardships of the people were becoming even greater. People had begun to realize that Germany's chances of victory had almost disappeared. The country's economic and social systems had gradually begun to break down. It was becoming increasingly difficult for the German government to manage the situation. The pressure from the Allied powers was beginning to completely exhaust Germany. Germany was now struggling not to win the war, but to preserve its very existence. Not only the battlefield, but every city in Germany was gradually moving toward defeat. By the end of 1918, people's anger was rapidly increasing throughout Germany. The long war, hunger, and poverty had left ordinary citizens completely hopeless. Millions of families had lost their loved ones and were facing continuous hardships. People had begun to feel that the government had failed to solve the country's problems. Protests and strikes had begun in many cities. Workers had left their factories and begun demonstrating in the streets. The soldiers had also grown weary of the war and had begun demanding peace. Many soldiers had begun refusing to continue fighting. Crowds of people in many places had begun shouting slogans against the government. The people's biggest demand was the immediate end of the war. Political parties and social organizations had also begun increasing pressure on the government. Acts of rebellion had begun occurring at many German ports and military bases. Gradually, the protests began spreading across the country, and the situation started moving out of control. The authority of the government and the military had begun to weaken. People's trust in the old regime had almost completely disappeared. An atmosphere of instability and uncertainty had spread throughout the country. Every day, new reports of demonstrations and protests were emerging. A deep political crisis had emerged within Germany. This revolt was not only against the government but also against the long war itself. By the end of 1918, the demand for change within Germany had become extremely powerful. The growing rebellion and political crisis had severely weakened the position of German Emperor Wilhelm II. The trust of the public and political leaders in him was steadily declining. People in many parts of the country had begun demanding the end of the monarchy. The military was also no longer in a position to fully support the emperor as it once had. The government had begun to realize that it was no longer possible to preserve the old system. Amid growing pressure, Wilhelm II was forced to abdicate his throne. He resigned from the position of emperor, and his rule came to an end. Some time later, he had to leave Germany for his own safety. He went to the neighboring country of the Netherlands and lived there in exile. With his departure, the old order of the German Empire collapsed. The centuries-old monarchy in Germany had come to an end. The country had begun moving toward a new political era. The people saw it as a major historical transformation. Many people hoped that the war would now come to an end. However, the country's economic and social problems still remained. Germany had become politically unstable and economically weak. The very emperor whose orders had sent millions of soldiers to war was now out of power. One of Europe's most powerful monarchies had come to an end. Germany was now going to move forward with a new government and new challenges. The fall of the emperor marked the beginning of a new chapter in German history. By November 1918, Germany had no real option left to continue the war. The country's military, economy, and population were all going through extreme exhaustion and crisis. The new German government decided to begin peace negotiations with the Allied powers. After several days of discussions, an agreement was reached on the terms of the armistice. On November 11, 1918, Germany officially accepted the armistice. At exactly 11 o'clock in the morning, shelling ceased on the battlefronts. The devastating conflict that had lasted for 4 years had finally come to an end. The guns fell silent, and for the first time, stillness spread across the battlefield. Millions of soldiers breathed a sigh of relief and began hoping to return home. Many cities and villages across Europe had been completely devastated by the war. Hundreds of millions of people had lost their families and friends. Many soldiers were wounded, disabled, or suffering from psychological trauma. The war had ended, but its wounds were still very deep. The people of Germany believed that the difficult times would now gradually come to an end. But in reality, Germany's greatest crisis was only about to begin. The victorious nations were preparing to make major decisions about Germany's future. Germany had become economically weak and politically unstable. The country now had to face the consequences of the war and its harsh terms. People began to feel deep concern and uncertainty about the future. The armistice ended the fighting, but Germany's problems were far from over. After the war ended, the victorious nations held Germany primarily responsible for this devastating conflict. The Allied powers believed that Germany was responsible for the outbreak of the war and its consequences. Germany was accused of having pushed all of Europe into the flames of war through its policies. Germany was also held responsible for the deaths of millions of people and the massive destruction. The victorious nations decided that Germany would have to pay for the damages caused by the war. Germany considered this decision extremely harsh and humiliating. The German people believed that their country alone was not responsible for the war. People felt that the victorious nations wanted to deliberately weaken Germany. An atmosphere of despair and anger began to spread throughout the country. Many people viewed these accusations as a national humiliation. The pain of losing the war was already deeply rooted in people's minds. Now, along with defeat, the feeling of humiliation was also growing rapidly. Millions of Germans began to feel that they were being treated unfairly. The nation's prestige and honor had suffered a deep blow. People began to feel anxious and insecure about their future. Dissatisfaction and resentment were continuously increasing within German society. Many political groups openly began opposing these conditions. The pain of defeat and the feeling of humiliation continued to deepen in people's hearts. This humiliation was going to deeply influence German politics in the years to come. Germany's defeat was now not merely a military loss but had become a crisis of national honor. In 1919, the victorious nations gathered in Paris, the capital of France, for a major peace conference. The purpose of the conference was to determine the new world order after the war. Britain, France, and their allied nations began discussing Germany's future. Germany was not given an equal position at the conference. It was not granted the right to participate in the decision-making process. The German representatives were invited only to hear the terms. They were not given a full opportunity to present their views and influence the decisions. Germany felt helpless before the victorious nations. German leaders felt that other people were deciding their nation's fate. Germany's opinions were given very little importance at the conference. The German public viewed this situation as a profound humiliation. People began to feel that their country was not being treated fairly. Resentment toward the peace conference began to grow throughout Germany. People began to believe that this was not a process of peace but a process of punishment. German leaders were under immense pressure to accept these harsh terms. Because of the country's weakened condition, they had very few options left. Germany appeared to stand before the victorious nations like an accused nation. Its future, borders, and economy were being decided by other countries. This conference became a source of deep pain and humiliation for German society. The Paris Peace Conference became engraved in Germany's national memory as a symbol of injustice. After the peace conference and the harsh conditions, deep dissatisfaction began to spread throughout Germany. Millions of people began to feel that their country had been treated unfairly. The public believed that Germany had been punished more harshly than necessary. People began to feel that their national honor had been taken away. The memories of defeat and humiliation became deeply embedded in people's minds. Many citizens began to feel that their country was being deliberately weakened. Anger and despair began to spread rapidly throughout Germany. People began to feel anxious and insecure about their future. Among the youth, the desire to restore national honor also began to grow. Many political organizations began taking advantage of people's resentment. Ideas of nationalism and revenge gradually became more popular. People began refusing to consider themselves solely responsible for the defeat in the war. Support began growing for leaders who promised to restore the nation's honor. Anger and dissatisfaction within German society were continuing to deepen. The pain of humiliation was becoming a permanent feeling in people's hearts. Many citizens believed that one day Germany would become powerful again. The desire to regain national pride began spreading throughout the country. Memories of defeat gradually began turning into a desire for revenge. This feeling was destined to deeply influence German politics in the years to come. Germany's defeat and humiliation had planted the seeds of a new and dangerous conflict in the future.